I became fluent in Spanish in 8 months, and one of the key things that helped me to do so was that I figured out a way to acquire, learn, and deepen my vocabulary with minimal effort. Very minimal effort. I know there's a lot of ways that you can do so, like studying, looking up synonyms, manually sitting down to find more advanced ways of expressing yourself, which is all fair. You can do that as well. However, today we're talking about the lazy ways you can do so, because that's pretty much how I did it as well. I want to share 3 different ways or 3 different tips with you in this video today, just in case you're in a similar position where you've started speaking, but you feel like you want to deepen your vocabulary and sound a bit more advanced. Now, if you don't know who I am, my name's Jonathan. I started learning Spanish through immersion back in February 2021, and I set myself the goal that I wanted to be fluent by my birthday in November, because I wanted to go to Spain and like just speak to people in Spanish and have a trip and do that. And I actually accomplished it. So you can still see it on my Instagram. I documented it. I went to Madrid, and then I also went to Barcelona as well. I had an excellent time, by the way. Very, very good time. Very good days. But yeah, since then, I've done a few interviews explaining the process that I went through. So this is the interview I did with Mike Ben. Big shout out to Mike Ben, and also an interview I did with Pablo from Dreaming Spanish. Yeah, big shout out to those guys. Very instrumental in my journey as well. But the first thing that I would recommend, and it's something that you've probably heard before, however, there's a few details that I want to share with you, is reading. Now, reading is probably the fastest way to deepen your vocabulary just because of the sheer density of new vocabulary that you can expose yourself to. And if you do it in the right way, what you can do is you can still make it fairly comprehensible so that any new words that come up, you can kind of work out what they mean, or at least you don't have the need to constantly look up in the dictionary what everything means. Now, personally, as I mentioned, I'm quite lazy when it comes to language learning. So I never wrote anything down. I never studied anything. But through reading, I was able to pick up a few key certain words that I still remember to this day. And I can actually remember like where I learned them from. And it all comes down to reading. Now, when you break down reading, you can go the fiction route, you can go the non-fiction route. If you are specifically looking to develop your vocabulary, I would personally recommend going down the fiction route. Like I read a lot of novels. Let's say you don't really like novels, you can do non-fiction. So let's say you're into, I don't know, personal development books or mindset books. You can read those in Spanish and that would definitely be helpful. But it's the novels that for some reason, well, it makes sense because the author's really trying to like explain things in a bit of detail and really put their personality and their writing touch to the book. So they'll really explain things using words that you won't really hear outside. But yeah, the novels are probably a little bit more useful when it comes to exposing yourself to all kinds of vocabulary. With that being said though, one mistake I made was that when I started reading, I was a little bit too confident. I overestimated my reading abilities just because I was able to speak with people. And I thought, yeah, that's cool. Like, let me just jump into the big novels. You can do that, but what will happen is you will have to look up words often. And I found myself stopping all the time. And I was actually struggling to read, like to follow along the story. And it reminded me that reading is a skill as well. And you do have to be a little bit humble and say, okay, let me just start with the graded books. So I'll even show you, like I started with some of these graded books from Español con Juan Fernandez. Let me even show you my screen. So these are some of the ones that I read, right? Could I zoom in? Maybe? I'm not sure. But let me at least put this on so you can see my mouse. So I started off with these. These are all the books that I read just to start off with, just to get into the flow of reading. And this was like an A2 graded book. This was like a B1. There was 2 B1, B1s, B2, B2. And I imagine he might have more books out by now. But the point is, I would highly, highly, highly recommend start with the graded books. It will get you into the swing of reading. And what it will do is it will encourage your brain to start to understand, okay, when I'm reading, these are the type of words that I'm going to come across, because you'll find that there's a few, and this is the good thing actually, there's a few ways that people express themselves when they're writing stories that people just wouldn't say when they're speaking, even though it's not necessarily complex stuff. I'll give you an example. Like some specific words that I read through reading one was rostro, like cara, but rostro, which is kind of different, but similar type of meaning. Another one that I learned through reading was negar con la cabeza, or asentir con la cabeza. These are things that I just learned from reading. Another one, I'm currently reading a book called, what's the book called? It's called El Silencio de la Ciudad Blanca. So I'm reading this book at the moment and I learned one word and it's like abarrotado, something like that. I think it means like packed, right? Now, these are just things that come from the top of my mind. But the point is, when you're reading, you will expose yourself to vocabulary that you won't pick up from just normal conversations. And also the density of vocab, because obviously if you're watching a movie, you're watching a series, although they do speak a lot, there will be silences, there will be action scenes, there'll be driving scenes, there'll be some scenes where there's like some romance, which you're not really picking up any new Spanish. So reading is just like straight Spanish, it's just straight input, and the quality is so much higher. So the first thing I definitely recommend is, if you are looking to deepen your vocab, if you're just going to do one new thing, if you carry on doing the same thing but add one thing, reading. Reading. And what I did at first, where I could, especially with the bigger novels, is I would also find audiobooks. So I'd get the Kindle version, I'd get the audiobook version, and I'd read and listen at the same time. Now, some people might like doing that because it will just make sure that you've got the right pronunciation when you're listening to the words. Some people, now, I'm actually finding that I prefer removing the audiobook and just reading out loud. So for example, this book here, I'll read the audiobook and I will just read it out loud myself, because that also helps me to improve my pronunciation, just because I'm fairly confident that if I look at the word, I'll know how to pronounce it. But that's neither here nor there. You can start on one, you can move to the other one, you can do a mixture of both. The main thing is definitely look for opportunities to read. And if you can focus on the novels, that's going to help a lot. The second thing is, I would recommend switching up the type of input that you're receiving. So outside of reading, let's say you're the type of person you like to watch a lot of YouTube videos or you like to watch a lot of movies. If you can, switch up the genre, like switch it up completely. Because what it's going to do is it's going to now expose you to different types of vocab. Okay, so for example, there's certain series that I watched, like even one of the ones that I love are the more olden day series, like the ones that are based in the past. I love those ones because they use some words that I just like. I remember I was watching Velvet, which is probably one of my favorite series in Spanish from Spain. Like if you haven't watched it, I would 1000% recommend it. I've probably watched it a few times now. But there's just like a few words that I remember specifically learning from Velvet, like quehaceres, which is like something is not really that much. It's like these are little words. I just remember picking up, for example, even in this book, in this series, there was a lot of speaking in usted. For me, because I'm learning Spanish from Spain, they don't really use it that much. And this was able to give me more of a formal touch to my Spanish, or at least more of a formal exposure. Now, another thing that's also important is, even if it's not necessarily olden or series based in the past, if you can watch like a different type of content, and ideally, this is actually where I'd recommend trying to get away from the more conversational content. Like for example, if you're someone that watches a lot of day-to-day conversations, speaking between friends, that is great. But actually try and get more of like the formal, maybe even more the political side, or maybe like the podcasts where they're starting to use words that are a bit more longer, a bit more heavy, right? And those are the ways whereby you're going to pick up words like you wouldn't even like really considered it, but they're words that will just come to you. They will just come to you. Like for example, and there's a series actually that I'm currently watching, and it's called Legado. I think in English it's called Rotten Legacy. Yeah, it's called Legado. So I started watching this like yesterday, just randomly. I was like, do you know what? Let me it was Friday. I was like, do you know what? Let me watch a Spanish series. Let me just get some input in. And I watched some of the series just because I like this actor. He's one of my guys. He's one of the he's in a few series that I've seen, like Vivir sin permiso. I think he's in that as well. But anyways, I was watching this, and do you know there was a word that I heard that I've heard about it before, just because it was a bit more of a formal setting. I've heard the word before, but I would just never think of using it. And these are the situations that expose you to words, and you say, do you know what that could? So the word was redactar, which is basically like escribir. Well, it's kind of like escribir, but it's a bit more formal. It's like it's almost like to draw up a contract or to draw up like a speech or whatever it is. And these are like little things, but you will just expose yourself. If you switch up the genre, you expose yourself to some of this vocabulary, and what will happen is over time, you'll start to acquire it. But even without the multiple exposure, what typically happens, and the same thing happens with reading, is when you're watching a series, the vocab will stick sometimes a little bit better just because you can specifically remember where you learned it. And you have more of an emotional connection to the word, which is probably the most sticky way for a word to stick. If you can learn a word and have an emotional attachment to that word, like if it was like in a situation that required you to utilize some sort of emotion, whether it's happiness, whether it's joy, whether it's sadness, whether it's anger, and you learnt that word in one of those situations, the chances are you're probably way more likely to learn it. And so, for example, if you're watching a series and you have like, you're really involved in the series to the point where it's actually eating on your mind, like you're following the characters, you're emotionally involved, and then they say some words or someone's like really upset with like the boyfriend that cheated or something, and then she says, oh, I'm not going to use some words, but she says one word, that's how you learn them. That's how it starts to stick. But if you do that and then switch up the genre, then you'll be able to learn some deeper vocabulary. And I've done this quite a lot. And so I do like to, from time to time, go back to series that I've already watched or watch other series. I might not even watch the full thing, but just to expose myself. Because the good thing about this is you never know what you're going to learn, but you will learn something. Like you're not setting out to say, okay, today I'm going to learn how to say packed in another way, but you'll expose yourself to it and you'll learn it in another way. And that's how you start to deepen your vocab, the lazy way. The third thing I would also recommend, if possible, is try to increase the time you spend with natives. This one's another big one. If you can spend more time with natives, what you'll find is that naturally they will express themselves in ways that you probably haven't used that much before. Now, for example, my partner is from Spain. Okay, which is a big, 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 big help for myself. And there's certain times where as you can imagine, I've learned loads from her. And there's certain situations whereby maybe she'll say something and it sticks way more just because I have an emotional reason to learn that thing. Now, it doesn't have to necessarily be with like a partner. It could be just a friend. But the more you can spend time with actual natives, because watching content is one thing, watching movies is one thing, even reading is great, but reading is one thing. But then actually having a personal relationship with someone and them saying things to you, being able to take on that information is way easier, or at least at times is way more effective. So for example, I'll give you some examples that I wrote down of some words that I specifically learned from my partner, and I can remember when she mentioned it to me. One of them is apañarse, me apaño, which is kind of like, it kind of just means like a kind of, I'll put up with it or I'll settle. It's kind of like settling. So for example, you could say, bueno, no he cobrado tanto este mes, pero me apaño. It's kind of like saying, yeah, I didn't earn that much this month, but it's okay. Like I'll make do. I'll make do. That's basically what it means. Another one that I learned from my partner was, empeñarse, I think it is. Empeñarse. Se empaña. Yeah. So it's like, for example, it's kind of like insisting. Bueno, se empaña en ir al colegio. Se empaña en comer hamburguesas. No sé. But yeah, like I specifically learned that from her, and I distinctly remember when she told me about this, and I was like, interesting. I'm gonna start using that. So that's another one. I mentioned in another video before, like she was probably the person that got me to start using the word bambas, 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 which isn't really deepening your vocab, but it's kind of just finding synonyms. But these are things like if you speak to more natives, you'll expose yourself to them way, 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 way more. And what will happen is over time, you'll start to acquire this vocab. And just because of the emotional connection, you also acquire the vocab as well. Now, as I said at the start of the video, there are ways that are more effort heavy that I also say that aren't bad ideas. Like let's say you are studying for a test and you're like, no, I actually need to learn specific vocabulary. You can definitely sit down, look up words, look up synonyms, look up what you say. You can even ask AI like, okay, can you give me some synonyms of this? And it'll give you a list and you can go through and learn them, put them in an Anki deck. But the reason why I'm not going to talk about that yet is because it's not something that I've actually done up until this point. I've never really had to do that. However, I'm probably actually leaning into getting into that type of studying more. So as I do, I'll make more videos about it. But for now, those are the key lazy methods that you can use to improve your vocabulary in Spanish. And by the way, if you are also learning Spanish and you'd like to learn Spanish and improve your Spanish alongside myself and a small group of people that I'm working with, just to help them to optimize their immersion, optimize their language learning and get to the next level, you've got the link in the description, and I'll see you in the next video.